Hey everyone, Secretary Pete here. We'll take a minute to give folks a chance to join, but hope everybody's doing well. Hope everyone had a great Mother's Day weekend, and another word of just appreciation to all of the mothers out there. And to everyone getting through a complicated season in American life as we're figuring out a safe return to many of the things we're used to doing, and yet a long way from fully conquering this pandemic. We're going to be having a great conversation that I think is really timely, really important, and I think you're going to look forward to if you're not already familiar with the extraordinary work that Senator Padilla has been doing. I'm going to try to, as usual, do two things at once and bring him in as soon as possible. And in the meantime, hope also that you've taken a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with the American Jobs Plan. You may have seen last week news that the U.S. economy added 266,000 new jobs. That's a lot, but we have a steep climb ahead of us, and it's a reminder of the work that we need to do in order to really have the kind of economy that Americans can thrive in. This is not just about stimulus. This is not just about getting through this economic cycle, the quarter, the month, the year. This is about making sure that we have a competitive economy and that we're able to thrive for literally decades to come. I mean, right now, we are relying on infrastructure that was built sometimes a century or more ago. I saw it myself on our most recent trip to Pittsburgh. We were looking at bridges that were built more than 100 years ago, locks and dams designed for a 50-year life, put in as part of the New Deal, put in as part of a jobs program generations ago, which were fantastic, but still aren't really getting the kind of maintenance and support that they need. And the consequence of that is that we're going to see continued pressure on our competitiveness and just our ability to get around. While we're waiting for the senator to come in, I just also want to reemphasize the importance of safety as something that's part of the jobs plan, something that's part of what our department thinks about and works on every single day, and something where we have a chance to make a huge difference. Of course, we're working on all of the things that go to safety in the design of our infrastructure resources and policies, in the kinds of things that that the Department of Transportation does. But safety is an example of something that can't simply be done through policy, can't simply be done out of Washington. Something that really requires everybody paying attention, and especially as we see more vehicles getting back on the road, asking you to think about how you can be contributing to safety. I think we got the senator now, so give him a second to get in. There he is. Senator, thanks so much for taking time. How are you?
Mr. Secretary, I am good. A couple quick things as we were trying to log in. I thought I'd give a shout out to all the moms out there. So let me echo that. Double. Sunday was Mother's Day, of course. And Angela would be proud. I know she was looking forward to watching our conversation. And yesterday was Dia de las Madres for all the Latin American moms across the country that celebrate twice, not just one day. And speaking of doing two things at once, just a warning, in about 20 minutes or so, I may be called to Rules Committee to go cast a vote on S1, which you know is important. So if we get cut short on the back end, you'll know why.
Sounds good, and thanks for juggling a really intense schedule as the senator returns to Washington this week. You and I, of course, both new in our current roles, although you're no stranger to public service, and we're in statewide elected office when we first met. How has it been so far, adjusting to your new leadership role in the U.S. Senate?
Well, it's what's the old saying? Drinking from a fire hose. You know, kind of like that. And I tell all my friends and family, if I've ever said that before in my life, I take it back, because nothing compares to what the last few months have been like. You know, both good, great opportunities. The American Rescue Plan, to think, you know, I had a chance to participate in one of the most significant acts of Congress since the New Deal in my first few weeks as a senator is huge. But definitely sobered by the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still trying to work our way through, the deadly insurrection of January 6th in our nation's capital. You know, big reminders of both the importance and the urgency of our work.
It's well said, and we shouldn't overlook the fact that the rescue plan was a hugely consequential piece of legislation. So thank you for your support for that. And I can tell you that we in the department are working hard to make sure that the resources that you in Congress authorized are going to good use out in the communities that need them. One reason I was really looking forward to speaking with you is that I know you've been very thoughtful and very active on the subject of equity in transportation and beyond. And knowing all of the different communities that you serve and represent in California, I'd love to learn a little more about how transportation has contributed to equity, or maybe how transportation issues have contributed to inequity in your state and in the communities that you know well.
Right. No, I think there's a couple things that immediately come to mind. First, California, as everybody knows, is a large and very diverse state. Not, from so many standpoints. We have rural communities, urban communities, coastal areas, inland areas, southern, northern, et cetera. And I think it reflects in transportation. You have a lot of, public transit-dependent populations in some of the larger urban areas of California, but it seems like California was late to the game in really investing in subway systems, et cetera. So, we're getting there. We have now pretty thorough heavy rail plus increasingly light rail in addition to bus services, but it's always a struggle where the housing was built versus where the public transit infrastructure is today, and trying to make those improvements, including, for example, connecting into LAX down in the Los Angeles area. But when you talk to most Californians and ask what's transportation like, the first word that comes to mind is traffic. Traffic. Because so many folks, either carpooling or driving on their own in very congested highways, you get these very long commutes to and from work, to and from school and work, and further and further commutes because of housing unaffordability. That's a whole other crisis that we need to tackle. So investing in our transportation and our transit infrastructure, not just from a safety standpoint or deferred maintenance standpoint, but making it more efficient, is going to improve the quality of life of a lot of Californians.
That relationship between housing and transportation, it's so important because, as you know, the executive branch sometimes gets into these silos, right? But the reality is we shouldn't be thinking about transportation one week, housing the next. And I know you don't, as a senator, you think about how they fit together, and I appreciate your attention to how one of them really drives the other. In fact, I'm looking forward to testifying in front of the Senate committee with Secretary Fudge, the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, in a way that hopefully will speak to that joint priority. Because in a family budget, you add up housing and transportation, it's becoming a huge part of what people are up against.
Right. So here's a question for you, Mr. Secretary. We talk about the American Rescue Plan, the opportunities of the American Jobs Plan, and how transportation infrastructure has impacted communities. How will the American Jobs Plan address some of the gaps in transportation that we've discussed, and help the communities get access not just to improved transportation, but to jobs and other opportunities?
This is one of the reasons we're so excited about the American Jobs Plan, because it represents a generational investment in helping people get to where they need to be. Economic opportunity is not available to you if you literally can't get to a job, or you can't get there without a commute that's literally more hours than you can manage. So it's one of the reasons why we're looking at things like a major expansion in federal resources for public transit, so that not only so that everybody who's currently transit dependent is better connected to economic opportunity, but so that transit is a means of choice for getting around, not just because you don't have a car, but because it's the best way to get from point A to point B, and that takes dollars. We're also really working with state and local governments and trying to make sure that they're empowered to solve local problems and solve their issues. And that means recognizing the solutions don't always have to come from here in Washington, but more of the resources have to. Otherwise, communities are going to be left out. They are going to be left behind, and they can even be cut off. And that was another thing I was eager to ask you about, because I know the big part of creating equitable transportation is reconnecting communities that have been divided, and sometimes not divided by accident, but actually divided by something like a highway or a railway that was put in through federal transportation policy. And let's face it, sometimes on purpose, routed through black or brown neighborhoods, or set up in a location that it really became a physical barrier. So I know you've been doing some work on this right now in the Senate, and would love for folks who are tuning in to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. No, that's appreciate you raising it. Not sure if this was a deep briefing when you were onboarding as Secretary of Transportation, but Exhibit A is really the National Highway Plan. When we were first building out our nation's highway system, it was very intentional by those who designed it to split up communities of color, lower income neighborhoods, and not just creating the physical separation from some communities to the rest of their cities and towns, but literally creating a barrier to opportunity because they were disconnected from the economy, disconnected from culture. So it's in the spirit of trying to address some of those historic injustices that I've signed on to the Reconnecting Communities Act, along with Senators Carper, Schumer, and so many others. How do we utilize future infrastructure investments both as opportunities to correct historic wrongs? You think of Highway 580 in Oakland, for example, or Highway 99 in Fresno, just two California examples. But at the same time, be forward thinking and looking at opportunities to build off of new transportation infrastructure to uplift communities by creating opportunities. One of the great examples that comes to mind is the community of Crenshaw in Los Angeles with the Crenshaw line, the immediate success of the line as it's opened. It's creating those opportunities for commercial activity, housing development, and densification around those stations in a way that invests in those communities through opportunity, jobs, and otherwise. So that's part of how we need to be mindful in our infrastructure investment in this day and age.
That's great. I'm so glad to see the leadership and the policy work that you have underway there, and definitely speaks to one of our top priorities in terms of equity.
Right. And as we've been talking about equity, it's not just correcting those historic wrongs that very much have a racial injustice standpoint, but we also know that we're looking for opportunities to invest in infrastructure and address climate change at the same time. And so as a secretary and the face of transportation for the Biden administration, what are some of the ideas that you hope that we deliver on in Congress?
Yeah, I think what you're raising really speaks to the importance of environmental justice in the decisions that we're making. And certainly the different impacts of climate are a good example of that. We know historically that overburdened and underinvested communities have really borne the brunt of climate impacts. It's happened in every part of the country, from California to where I come from in Indiana. And it's one of the reasons the American Jobs Plan is very intentional about this, making sure that 40% of things like the climate investments we're making go to those historically underinvested and overburdened communities. It's also about recognizing the effects, not just the climate, but other environmental impacts of what's gone on in our transportation system. We were talking earlier about highways that might be routed through black or brown communities disproportionately. That means that the emissions that go with them, and often you have things like particulate matter leads to higher rates of asthma, and you can see this in the data, and it is a matter of justice. It's one of the reasons we really care about reducing emissions. Now, we're already working on this, so what we've started doing is include questions of climate and justice in the criteria of the grant programs that we have. Like we have a grant program called Infra. We already put out an announcement for over $800 million in opportunities and invited communities to come with us with their best proposals. They made it clear that part of what we're looking for is what they're going to do to proactively address issues of racial equity and issues of climate and environmental need, because we think that goes hand in hand with now it's the bread and butter of transportation policy, right along with the things that have been considered more traditionally around the need for efficiency and the need for economic impact. All of these things go together. Again, I know that you have been working for some time. You're doing it now in the Senate, and you have in the past, on issues related to pollution that are a justice issue. So maybe you could share a little bit more about the work that you've done on that.
Yeah, no, I think, teed up a great opportunity to share what one of my first bills I've introduced as a senator is all about. When we think of infrastructure, when it comes to transportation, you can think of a road, you can think of a bridge, you can think of a railway or a highway, but we also need to think about the vehicles that are utilizing those corridors and are the sources of the ongoing emission pollution impact to those communities. So this is an example of where I take my job personal, and I make no apologies for that. I remember when I was in elementary school and in junior high for years, I would ride a school bus to and from school. And I still remember the diesel exhaust from that school bus. And we've done some homework, and we realized that today there's still more than 90% of the bus fleet in America are school buses. And more than 96% of those school buses are those same diesel buses.
Wow.
Uh, but we have options today that didn't exist before. Electric buses are zero emission buses. And so one of my bills, the Clean Commute for Kids Act, would make the federal government a partner with school districts across America to retire those diesel buses sooner rather than later and replace them with proven technology, electric vehicle buses. And we can achieve multiple goals with this move. Number one, of course, it's better for the planet. We reduce emissions, reduce pollution. It's better for the environment. Number two, when kids today aren't breathing in that diesel exhaust that I used to breathe in, they're going to be healthier. So we have public health benefits through transitioning of school buses. And guess what? Surprise, surprise. When kids are healthier, they don't have respiratory issues, that sort of thing, they learn better. Study shows that academic performance improves along with better health. So it's really a win-win-win, and I proposed a $25 billion grant program, again, for the federal government to assist school districts across the America either begin or accelerate their transition to clean buses. So there's this is just another example of how to leverage this infrastructure investment opportunities for multiple policy objectives.
That's really exciting to hear. I mean, just the cleaner air for kids who are around these buses every day. And I would think for school districts that are pressed, the fuel savings that they could capture over time, thanks to this, would be big too. So really excited to
And the job creation opportunities, right? Because
Yep.
we're going to ramp up the purchases of electric buses. That's domestic manufacturing opportunities. The infrastructure, including chargers for these buses, that needs to be installed to accommodate tremendous job opportunities. And I know, again, there's a reason this is called the American Jobs Plan. So can you share a little bit more with us about potential job opportunities and making sure that we're inclusive of those opportunities for communities that have historically been left out?
Yeah, the biggest thing I hope people come to realize about the jobs is that this will create jobs for everyone. We're talking about millions of good paying jobs. We're talking about union jobs. And we're talking about jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree. Skills will be involved for sure. But if you think about the work we're going to need, pipe fitters to be involved in removing lead pipes, construction workers on the road and bridge improvements that we need to do, insulators to help retrofit our buildings to make them more climate friendly, electrical workers setting up that network of electric vehicle charging stations. We want to do 500,000+ new charging stations around the country. When we're talking about laying cable, what communication workers and sheet metal workers, other union workers are doing there. I mean, these are not jobs that are so hard to imagine. Sometimes people think they're really futuristic, and some of them will be, but a lot of these are jobs that exist today. We need more of them, and it's really in many ways a more blue collar vision than I think people realize, even as it makes us more clean and green and ready for that future. I know we're coming up on time, and you got votes coming up. I would love to ask you, just knowing that we're coming off Public Service Recognition Week, what public service means to you, somebody who's led and served in many different ways, and what you would say to people who are thinking about their path in life, and how you might encourage them to a calling in public service.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It reminds me of I think two of the things that really have molded who I am and why I do what I do. First of all, the values with which my brother, my sister, and I were raised. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. They came with little formal education, but big dreams and a tremendous work ethic. And among the values they prioritized for my brother and my sister and I was, number one, getting a good education. Right, that's often a key pathway for a better life and a better future, but also service to others. Times were tough at times in our household, but we were always reminded, as tough as it was for us, there was probably people, including some of our neighbors, that were struggling even more. And whether it's because of our faith or just our values, we had an obligation to serve others to the extent that we could. And growing up, as I started moving about the greater Los Angeles area where I grew up playing baseball, Little League ball, high school ball. That's when my eyes were open to the inequities in our society. Why some communities seem to have it better from a safety standpoint, newer infrastructure standpoint, better looking schools versus, where I went to school. And so I always knew that growing up, I'd want to do something to help address that, never imagining that there's a whole career in this. But my degree's in mechanical engineering. I thought I was going to be an engineer, maybe volunteer with community organizations or nonprofits in my spare time. Never did I imagine, full-time jobs in public service, elected and otherwise. So, I'd encourage people that are interested in public service to first think about your passion. What's the issue you want to impact? And that'll help guide, the federal government, state government, local government, where to channel those energies. And there's always room for more committed people in public service.
That's great, and I hope that message is well received, because we need more people following that path and motivated by the kinds of things we're talking about.
And I know I got to run in a minute, but I got to at least do this. In preparation for this event, we reached out to my social media followers asking what questions they may want to have me ask or for us to discuss. I have a lot of followers whose language is primarily Spanish, so I'm throwing a Spanish language question at you, Señor Secretario. ¿Cuál es la mejor manera de asegurar que el éxito de los proyectos de transporte en nuestras comunidades benefician a todos? So what's the best way to ensure, I'll translate for those who don't speak Spanish, best way that we can help ensure the public that the projects that are ultimately approved and funded are truly having the positive benefits for everybody in the community?
Yeah, I'll try my best here. So, lo más importante creo es que los perspectivos de la comunidad están considerados en las decisiones. Y un proyecto con éxito es uno que que puede beneficiar a todos en la comunidad, no solo una parte o otra parte, pero para todos. So that's to say that a successful transportation project is one that benefits everybody, and that means including the perspective of the communities that are impacted. We have a very mixed history in this country of doing that, but when we do it well, it makes a big difference. So I'll do the same to you. Just before we wrap up, would love to know your favorite mode of transportation. ¿Cuál es su modalidad de transporte preferida?
Mi manera de transporte preferido es caminar. Es lo más saludable, pero con el horario que mantengo no siempre es posible. A veces tengo que viajar por avión de Los Ángeles al Capitolio o en carro de cita a cita, pero mi manera preferida es caminar. So my favorite mode of transportation, believe it or not, is walking. The nature of my job doesn't make it easy all the time. So we get a lot of our steps in and around the Capitol and
That's right.
the committee. But back and forth from California to Washington, I think a plane is required. That'd be a long, super long walk. Yeah, there you go.
Fair enough. It's a great answer. We overlook active transportation like walking too much.
Right. Pedestrian safety. Pedestrian safety.
Absolutely.
Former Mayor Pete.
Claro. Hey, thanks so much for taking time. Thanks for what you're doing every day in the U.S. Senate. I'm really looking forward to working with you to deliver more transportation options, more equity, more jobs for the people that you and I both serve.
Likewise. And I know we're still negotiating the final package here, but I want us to be bold, think big, and do right by the American people. Thanks for your leadership.
Amen. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.